Greetings, this is Phi 21.081, and in today's transmission we have a few new things. You probably noticed the splash animation at the beginning of the Photon logo. Just finished that and included that. It's a new aspect of our transmissions here. Second, you might notice I'm wearing a new hat. Isn't it fantastic? It's going to be my transmission hat. I love it. Third, this is the first transmission of our series, Visitors to the Outpost. And my very good friend Joe C. Smolen came by. Joe happens to live pretty close to the edge of the universe, so it's not hard for him to get here. And we've been friends for a few years, and Joe's the kind of guy that you really want to have as a friend. He's always seems to be there when you need him, and he's a terrific listener, a great conversationalist, and I've enjoyed his company so much over the years. And we've always thought it would be really nice to record our conversations. Now I understand there's probably nothing more indulgent than a couple of old chuckleheads thinking that anybody wants to listen to what they have to say, but here we are, we're doing it. And so Joe came by a few days ago, and we sat under the security camera and decided to give it a go. So we still have the training wheels on with this particular endeavor, but we're going to get there. So Joe is a developing author right now. He has a number of works that he's completed, and had the privilege of working with him on a website, joecsmolen.com. I do recommend you check that out. We'll be talking a little bit about this, but there you can check out his latest blog posts, a little bit about Joe, subscribe to his newsletter, and even check out some of his recent works. Lostine is his completed novel, and you can check out a sample chapter from that, Widows. So let's just get started with the interview. Here we go. Here is Joe Smolen and I. Hey, Joe.
Hey, fine. Great to be here.
Thanks for coming to the Outpost today.
Yes.
Being our first visitor to the Outpost.
Yeah. Before I came in here, I went down the hall, and you want to know where I was going. I had my chance. I could have told you the truth. I'm a BATF agent, and I was down to search the house for weapons and contraband. But I'm always kind of slow on that.
I don't keep those things in the house. I actually bury them in the backyard.
Oh, you got a lot of fresh dirt out there.
I know, that kind of makes it easy to find, doesn't it?
No, it confuses me. Go out and check it. I guess a metal detector is what I need next time. And then I gave that away.
I've never had a metal detector. Have you ever had one?
Not that I used.
Not that you used.
I can't remember
so
how
you just
came
collect them
it.
and you don't use them? Or?
No, Sherry buys things that she thinks have value, and it was a really nice metal detector. Oh no, I got that metal detector from a friend of mine who just decided to clear out of town all of a sudden, and he left it behind in a locker that he had. He said, "You can have whatever's in there."
Oh.
He had a commercial sewing machine and metal detector, some tools, and great big giant lock on the door, and he had left his bedroll in there, which he came back for after a while, after about a year. His history is Buckaroo. Did about 20 years of that.
Buckaroo? What does that mean?
You're a ranch hand.
Oh, like a like a cowboy.
Yeah, exactly. And he worked with a string of about 9 horses all the time. Usually was out on the range.
Oh.
He'd only ride them one day and then let it rest for a week.
Just a horse and his metal detector,
huh? Yeah. I don't know. Maybe
metal detector over his shoulder.
Looking for part of the fence to fall down.
We're just getting this going, folks. It's our first real broadcast from the Outpost. And It's been a long time coming, but I'm really glad that you're the first guy to come here.
Yeah, no pictures of Hitler here. That movie Contact was, that was pretty darn interesting.
Oh, I asked Joe to watch the movie Contact, yeah. So what was your takeaway with that? Do you think that there's potentially alien civilizations that have interest in us and would want to communicate with us?
That's one of my what do you call them, posts on my own site.
Oh yeah, that's right.
4K,
Yeah, you were talking about that, the 4K, right? Yeah, that's right.
Seems like the potential even just in the Milky Way is pretty darn high.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I don't know why we got to go all the way to Vega. We got 4,000 planets, Class M planets, just in right here in the Milky Way.
Right, and when you think about that, just the countless multitude of stars, right? Mm-hmm. Just not only in this galaxy, but in the innumerable numbers of galaxies that are out there. I've been catching up on some of the Hubble Deep Field projects. Where back when one of the first things they did with Hubble when they got it deployed was point it to a dark spot in the sky and just leave it there.
And it's just optical too.
Right. Yeah. And it's just like, just getting little random, photons that are coming in very slowly from these very, very far away places. But, over time, like 11 days, I think was the first test they did. And, it showed like there were thousands of galaxies in this small patch of sky that appeared to be black. And so they've been continuing that and expanding the deep field, kind of going back to the same place and looking at a wider range and looking deeper. And it's just incredible, and they can see this redshift of galaxies, going back to what they think is like, more than 13 billion years, right? And so as far as we can comprehend, it's filled with galaxies that are filled with stars, and there's got to be like just incomprehensible things happening everywhere,
It might be one of those rooms too, like they used to have at Ripley's Believe It or Not. Remember you walked in there and they had all those little lights on the walls, but they had mirrors, and it looked like it was infinitely long.
For sure. Yeah, it might just be a mirror. That's all.
We might just be in a little chamber that seems to...
I watch a lot of things, about space and the universe, and there are so many different ideas about it, but it's all just conjecture,
Oh yeah.
And especially whether there's an end to it or not. Mm-hmm. And although it looks like as we peer back, looking at 13 billion years in the past, because remember that those photons left, that galaxy that long ago, and they've been traveling unimpeded, through the universe until they reach a telescope that we're pointing at it. And there's so many phenomenal kinds of things like that are happening everywhere, and but we just kind of go through our little mundane lives without thinking about that. But I think it's important. I think I think that we should have a cosmic perspective, for life here on Earth, and not see ourselves as just everything is here on the surface. But we're participating in something I think that's really quite larger and more important.
Kind of push our egos a little way in the background. It reminds me of a wake-up call I got recently. Joseph Christopher Smolen, all my life, 74 years, and that's my name, and that's how unique I am, that name. So I found out recently, searching the web, that there's more than one Joseph Christopher Smolen. All of a sudden it hit me that those basic questions, who am I, where did I come from, where am I going, I don't even know as clear as I thought I did who I am. I used to think, that's no problem. My name is this, and
unfortunately, all those other guys have the same social security number as you. So
yeah, there's some uniqueness. Nobody had the same service number as me. Yeah,
right.
Or I had. Yeah, it's in Contact. I found that I had a couple of problems with the story. As a writer, I can't help but kind of dissect the story. And there were two scenes where the government now is going to screw down on her and her team. One about halfway through and one toward the end where the government is leaning on it real hard. And both Sherry and I are sitting there watching that and saying, kind of saying to ourselves the same exact thing. Man, this is tedious. I've seen these scenes, these exact same scenes in a whole bunch of stories,
Right.
and so it was kind of like the when you write a story about a topic like that, like something that cosmic, as you say, you can't help but fail because ultimately it's all speculation.
Sure.
And as soon as you
Right.
as soon as you give it definition, now the mystery sort of disappears, and it reminded me of, and I thought to myself, well, the problem with the story is that it's told from the standpoint of adults instead of like E.T., which was so completely plausible because it was kids that were telling the story, or the kids' point of
Right.
view, and
Yeah.
their lack of need to be that specific or to prove something about whatever it would prove. I thought, wow, it's a good story, but those two scenes really let the air let the air out of the suspending disbelief. My disbelief was sinking
Right.
during those two scenes.
Uh-huh. So Carl Sagan wrote it. The famous physicist, and
Oh, he did.
Yeah.
It did said something about Carl. I figured it was Sagan they were talking about.
right,
Yeah.
right. So it's his story, and he decided to write a fictional story to kind of work through these topics. I think
Yeah, yeah.
so. What would happen if we received a message, and how would an alien culture that doesn't speak our languages or even have the same kinds of ideas about communication, capture our attention, right? And I think that layered message is the most intriguing aspect. That there's this big, bold series of prime numbers that are coming through, and this, but hidden inside of that is more and more and more, and you keep unpacking it and keep unpacking it, and yeah. So a super intelligent race of beings would be able to think that way, and be able and know how to do those things, right?
I thought the main aspect of that story, the part of it that really had power to my mind, was just as where we are now dealing with COVID and watching the world and humanity around us dealing with COVID. He hit it on the head when he basically said that people are not going to be able to cope with it.
Yeah.
A whole lot of people are just going to go nuts if they are faced with that reality. They're told that, here they come, or we're talking to them now, and you're going to meet them pretty soon.
Right. So, Sagan worked, adjacent to government all his life, right?
Yeah.
And, particularly JPLs, and largely government funded, and, and all of that. So I'm sure that, he was experiencing a lot of this kind of censorship and, or choice of funding kinds of decisions about stuff, right? So not necessarily going after, truth for the sake of it, but, chasing things that are just for other reasons, probably, financial or, other people's interests and that kind of stuff, and I've seen it personally. I mean, I know that it's really true, and it does happen. And we did kind of see it with COVID, right? I mean, we saw different stories, or fear to tell the truth, or different perceptions of the truth.
Or what is
all
the
of that.
truth?
What is the truth, right? What is the truth ultimately, right? Yeah. And I mean, for me, it's like the perfect fantasy movie because it captures this intrigue that there's something bigger out there, and there's going to be a day probably where we're going to have an interaction, and what would that be like? There's another movie too called Arrival, where the ship comes down, and these really strange beings that speak in kind of smoke signatures, kind of thing, and and there was a whole process of the interface of trying to find the common language, between the two, and that's a pretty interesting story too. But actually, this kind of leads to what I want to talk about today, and that's writing, right? So, on
Who does any of that?
So for those of you that don't know, Joe is a fantastic author. We've just completed a new website for him, joecsmolen.com. And
I don't write fantasy, guys.
No.
I write fantastic, but no fantasy.
No, but you write.
Yeah.
Right? And the first words on your website are "I write," period.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that for an author to be putting that out there, because it's almost like I think, therefore I am. I write, therefore I am. I mean, it's got that kind of, your essence is, geared towards a certain, perspective. And, I like that.
What did you do? But you put right below that, the way you built the site, you read.
Yeah. Joe says I write, and the button says you read.
You could read that as a statement or as a imperative case here.
Yeah.
Get going and read. There's no, the site doesn't have any, what do you call it, supplication at all to it. Here I am, and you take it from here.
Yeah. I mean, I think a good site should be inviting that way. But it's been making me think about something that I recently came across that I didn't know about. So there was this French philosopher, 20th century French philosopher, Jacques Derrida. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
No. And so he had this great interest in the human need to write. And I think one of his most famous papers is something called Archive Fever. This like compulsion of humanity to document, right? To put things down. And Derrida started to, kind of take a step back from that and look at that from the perspective of making marks, to capture thought, right? So going from the whole thing of, something that you want to express to the formal system of expression, right? And looking at grammar and looking at all of those things,
Grammar?
right?
What's that?
Yeah, right.
Bypass it if you can.
And I, one of the distinctions that he brings up is that, writing is a completely different thing than speaking, and,
Sure is.
The oral tradition of communication, came in a very different way. And if you think about
It's a different skill.
the
completely.
depth of information that comes from speaking rather than just reading words off a page.
Mm-hmm.
For some things that makes more sense, but for other things, if you're trying to make a point, speaking words are really the way to go. And I've been thinking about that a lot as, I've been starting to package up my own research and think about what's the best way to do it. I always thought like some massive book on the golden ratio would be the way to do it, but no one will sit through it. No one will read it all, right? Because it's just going to be too complicated.
It must be 600, 800 pages. How am I going to touch it?
Yeah. And, full of all of these things that are alienating to people, right? All of these pictures and diagrams and formulas and all of that stuff. But if you can start to speak and tell a story, I think that's where the power, comes through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even in writing, I think the best stories are the ones that have good dialogue, where people are engaging with one another in the
Maybe
stories.
sounds like dialogue or sounds like a person speaking too.
Yeah.
voice.
Sounds real.
The
right.
voice,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. And so you've thought a lot about that.
That's all I'm
Particularly
able to do. Really. I don't mean think. I mean right, sounding like it's somebody talking.
So you create a lot of characters.
Yeah, I don't know where they come from.
Yeah, isn't that the most strange thing? In my experience in writing a novel too, I felt like they were almost real in a way. Like they had a mind of their own. And you start to, question your own mind. Of like, are those, entities that are actually inside of me? Like, or how partitioned are they from my own self or my own thinking?
I sort of, I never expected it from the beginning of writing about 5 years ago. What I was doing, what I was going to get done, why I wanted to do it, or if I even wanted to do it. I've learned over time that the business of documenting or the compulsion to write stuff has got a lot to do for me with just figuring out what I actually think about what I'm writing about. you have this front story where the characters are interacting and are doing all this and that, and then there's a backstory that tells you about what's going on inside the characters. The what's going on inside the characters is basically what's always going on inside me. And I'm trying to. I literally in the story figure out what I think about that. I give some. And maybe am able to put some of those conflicts outside myself through the story, through putting it in a story context where it seems to have some value and make some sense. I think that's really it for me as a writer. I've had enough time to sort of like figure that out. In a sense, it kind of like, well, what's that Simon and Garfunkel song, writing songs the voices never shared? It almost never... What happens to my stories, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter as much as a personal journey of figuring things out for myself. I have to just sit down and really think about what exactly did I feel in that circumstance. Not sort of, but exactly, so that I can pass it on and it be understood.
Right.
Yeah. That's...
Yeah, I found, I felt like a lot of my characters were dimensions of me. And it was really interesting, a few times where there were these debates that were happening. And here I am. Yeah. I'm the one writing both sides of the debate, right?
Yeah.
And I realized, like, this really, like, they're both a part of me, and maybe I am dealing with this kind of inner conflict in myself, and writing is a way to go through it.
Common. Bob Dylan says that he's coming from an autobiographical place in general.
Sure. Well, how can we help but write about what we've experienced? I mean, we don't really know anything else, right?
How do these authors do it? What they write is a completely made up world with completely made up, invented characteristics and capabilities of the characters. How do they do that? That's not autobiographical that I can imagine. And maybe it is. I have never heard anybody say one way or the other about it. Or like Stephen King, those stories creep me out. How can that guy, in my mind, how does he day to day live with some of that stuff? I mean, live within the mind of the sinister, or perverted character, and then live with the terror of the victim, live in that, and then, go. How does he do that? I couldn't do that. They're very skilled stories, but I could never go there personally.
Well, it's almost 10 years. It's over 10 years since I wrote my novel. And I had Stephen King in mind.
Yeah, The Veil.
The Veil, right? And I had a couple of scenes that were, intensely violent. And I kind of, where I'm at right now, I don't think I would ever want to go there again. I don't think I would ever want to create those kinds of scenes and put them in somebody else's mind. I think that the world's got enough of that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Yeah. And we ought to be seeking to start creating interesting content that elevates the human experience, rather than keeps bringing us back down into our deepest and darkest places, right? All the violence that I did have came out of, the depths of the characters, right? And they almost couldn't help that because of what they had experienced and all that. But I know it's got to be a better way to talk about things.
I
think. Get away from the violence and get into a deeper spiritual experience with one another through our art and what we're.
I always seem to be in a story like within a couple 100 feet of the dark side, pretty close. I never quite go there, but I'm right on the edge of it all the time. I think mostly because the characters have to have, when you're dealing with life and death, you're dealing with something real, and you're not just titillating each other,
right?
Or having this intellectual interaction where there's nothing at stake. If there's violence, or impending or potential violence. There's some kind of actual visceral fear. It's just there's a sort of a detachment, and it's hard for me to get a sense of a story where the characters really are all coming from a safe place. I mean, like, so what of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's not much of a story, unfortunately, right? I mean, if everyone's just getting along and everything's fine, it's like, well, thanks for sharing that.
Violence is really part of life,
Yeah.
To me.
I mean, unless there's just something really beautiful that can be shown, right? That inspires us into a new way of thinking and a new way of being with one another. But I don't know what those things are yet. Something to explore.
Yeah.
But we have brushed up against the apocalypse here in like the last year. I felt there were so many things that felt like they were just teetering on the edge, right? And we could have fallen into the abyss, and that's like another reason why I'm so tired of things that are being put forward as entertainment that are these apocalyptic scenes of the future. And why aren't people talking about the potential for like a beautiful future?
Those scenes are the same ones where everybody's
always
got a pistol or
right.
They're speeding cars,
right?
And crashing and explosions. It's all the same stuff. It's really manipulating the audience's emotions, I think, without really any new content.
Right. Yeah, I think people have just come to accept that we're heading towards a dystopian future, so the entertainment industry keeps showing that, which is going to fulfill the prophecy, I believe, right?
Yeah.
I think ultimately, but other things that I see happening too, that I think in the last year, and brushing up against the apocalypse is like the intolerance that seems to be building, and the polarization that's happening, and people are so unwilling to compromise, and if you are different than me ideologically, then I may want to kill you, right? We may want to go that far.
You're reminding me of a little short story I haven't promulgated it at all. It's called Bob and Dylan, and Bob is a Marine, and he's in the Marines in combat in Vietnam, and he has his baggage, and then Dylan is a guy that didn't do much of anything and got some education, and they're old buddies that they haven't seen each other in 15 years, and so Dylan meets Bob at the airport, and Bob has got on a real nice tartan suit, and he's made quite an effort to get there. He's flown into where Dylan lives, and anyway, they get in the car together, and they head off, and they don't get even 5 miles from the airport before they start to get on each other's nerves, and they go behind this tire shop, this truck stop, and they get into a fist fight. And they give each other a thrashing, and in the end, they end up together, kind of accepting each other. But the whole point of the story is, like, I think Dylan, what he says to Bob is, this is just all a bunch of rants unless we concede some points to each other.
Have you ever been in a fight like that?
No, not with somebody I knew.
No.
I once tried to choke a guy on the sidewalk, but it was over. It was a professional difference.
I see. I've never been in that kind of thing, and I'm kind of glad. I don't think I would do very well, actually.
I just love that story, but Bob pounds the heck out of Dylan.
Bob and Dylan.
Yeah. And Dylan, he finally gets up, and they stop fighting, and he says, Dylan says, I don't think I've felt this awake in years. That's an aspect of violence, is the adrenaline and how awake you are.
Yeah, well, that's what Fight Club's all about, right? You've seen Fight Club, right? Or did you read it?
Is that the cage fighting that they have on TV?
No. So it's a movie and a novel, and it's about this guy who finds out he's got cancer, and he starts going to this group, and he's trying to find meaning in his life, like just feeling so empty. And he gets invited to come to this fight club, which is like, Friday night. Guys get together in like, an old garage or basement or warehouse or whatever like that. And they bare-fisted beat the crap out of one another, right? And it's about getting that out of you, like, and showing up for work on Monday, like all
for the rest of
all
the week.
bloody and bruised and everything, like. And the story is crazier than that. It just keeps going and going. That's just the beginning, But this idea of Fight Club, maybe men need that somehow. Maybe men need that kind of visceral.
I don't know any men that do. That's what they say.
Look, I'm about ready to just slug you here.
That's what people like to say about the Marine Corps. That's just men being men. But that's typical of people too. They want to take somebody like the Marine Corps and tell themselves they understand it. Never going to.
No. Yeah.
Never. The level of anxiety.
Yeah. I understand, the martial arts aspect. I think that's, the better way to, approach it. To, seek to have full control over your body and be able to do whatever is necessary and in the most controlled way, right? And only use force when necessary. I mean, those kinds of things, I think. That's true, man.
Only have to hit them once because it's going to be so powerful. It's going to be the end of them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Always impressed by that.
Yeah, me too, but never felt enough energy toward that. I did take karate one time for about 3 months, but I was driving a truck at the time, and it was a hustle of a truck driving job, and so I was running all day, carrying a lot of heavy stuff, and I just ultimately couldn't keep up the energy for both. I had to bag never forget the guy that ran the dojo, though.
That was a good experience, though?
Yeah, Chin Ho Lee.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was ex-ROK from Korea. And one time we were in a second story little arena where we were training, and he tells us to do such and so, and he happens to look out the window, and the next thing you know, he goes running for the door, and we all ran over to the window and looked down in the street, and he has these 2 kids. They're about 10 years old, and he has each one by the ear, and he's walking them off. He saw those guys do something. I don't know what it was that he saw them do, but he was going to take them back to speak to the owner. It's a business area down
awesome.
there. He just went down there like a bullet, and that very by the ear, you kids are going to comply. It was pretty good.
Well, I think this is probably a good point to break for our first little session here.
Okay.
I want to go back and see how everything's working out. So
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
He's
So
jabbing on forever.
thanks for
Yeah,
Folks,
I didn't pick my nose at any point, did I?
I didn't notice. I'm just too caught up in myself.
You
Really.
can edit that out.
Josie Smolen, thanks for coming to the Outpost
you're
today,
welcome.
and we'll have you back soon.
All right.
All right, thank you. Okay, and there we have it. Thanks for coming by, Joe. It was a great conversation. I would look forward to our next one. In our next meeting, Joe and I are going to talk about his most recent works, particularly Lostine, and anticipate that will be a very interesting discussion. So I mentioned there were new things here today, and a few new things that I already mentioned. And the last one, which I've been saving for the end, is the introduction of my virtual assistant, and that is Alter, the clerk of the Photon platform. And I think the best way to introduce him is to just let him do what he does. All right, Alter, take us out of here.
You have been listening to a Phi Architect transmission, broadcasting on the YouTube Federation channel, UCYZRQS16CBMSBKUYKMFHSFQ. Please subscribe to be notified of our latest transmissions. I also recommend visiting phiarchitect.com. There you may join our email newsletter for updates on all Phi Architect projects. This is Alta. The clerk of the photon platform. For Phi. Out.